everybody. My name is Nanja KROON and I'm in Portugal presenting a study elaborated with my colleague Maria do Céu Alves entitled The Accounting Professionals' Competency Gaps. This study has, above all, a theoretical contribution, identifying a framework that structures research on the adjustment between supply and demand for accounting professionals' competencies. Although some authors have already presented related frameworks, these assume a mainly educational perspective. Our framework was based on the SurfQual model, which has been applied in many fields other than its original one, marketing. But first, let us organize this presentation and see why this topic is so important. So as an agenda for this presentation, we have the following. We will start by announcing the importance of the paper, followed by the research questions stated. And then we will briefly approach the findings of our literature review. The presentation of the results will represent the central part of this presentation, including the conceptual model and the gaps characterization. After that, final considerations will be made regarding the study's findings, contributions, and limitations. So why is the identification of gaps between the supply and demand of accounting professionals' competencies important? Employers have detected shortcomings in the preparation of accounting students in higher education institutions. Assuming that the objective of these institutions is to prepare their students for a successful professional career, it seems that they are failing. Unfortunately, this problem is neither new nor recent, which leads us to believe that its causes have not been identified yet, or that it has not yet been possible to find a viable solution. This situation becomes all the more relevant when the profession is subject to frequent changes, which is the case of the accounting profession. Both technological and legal changes have been constant, causing changes in the competency sought by employers. Educational institutions are not always able to respond in a timely manner to these changes in demand, which in turn causes mismatches between demand and supply. To increase the adjustment, it is necessary to understand the cause of the maladjustment. Is it the lack of will on the part of educational institutions? Is it the lack of capacity? Are there other situations that cause the referred maladjustment? Ultimately, it are these questions that matter. We elaborated the framework and gaps characterization presented in this study to seek the answers and support the investigation searching for these answers. As referred to already, the final objective of our study is to propose a conceptual framework that may be used for meta-analysis and future investigation. To achieve this objective, two research questions were set out. The first research question approaches the gaps between demand and supply of accounting professionals' competencies. On the supply side, we limited the study to higher education, which provides most professional accountants' competencies. And on the demand side, we considered the labor market, adopting a perspective that envisions society or the labor market to be the consumer of the services provided by higher education instead of the student. The second research question incited us to build a conceptual framework incorporating the identified gaps. Our literature review focused on identifying empirical articles that investigate the supply and the demand for accounting professionals' competencies. Their results, as well as their focus, strategy, and methods, were analyzed. We conclude that both the supply and demand sides are investigated in similar amounts. There are also an identical number of articles that investigate both sides simultaneously. However, papers focusing on the adjustment between the two sides are still rare, and existing ones are quite recent. As for the research strategies, most authors use interviews, surveys, or focus groups. More recently, some authors diversified the way of obtaining their evidence, applying content analysis to job advertisements or accounting course programs. The results of the reviewed articles are used to build our conceptual model. As for the results of our investigation, they may be split in two: the conceptual model and the gaps characterization. But before coming to that, it is important to understand the theoretical background. In our literature review, we found two frameworks that represent so-called accounting education's expectation performance gap. Boy and Porter presented their framework in 2010 based on a small case study. Although they interviewed some employers, their model's focus was mostly educational, lacking a market perspective. Some years later, in 2017, Howcroft adapted his structure, making it more market-oriented and incorporating the influence of professional accounting bodies. Even so, we understand that this model does not confront the supply side with the demand side. Several authors used theoretical frameworks from other research areas, of which we highlight the SurfQual model. SurfQual is a multidimensional research instrument projected by Parasuraman et al. In 1985 to capture consumer expectations and perceptions of a service. The correspondent service quality model, popularly known as the GAPS model, has been applied in various contexts and cultural settings. Richardson in 2005 applied this framework in the field of accounting professionals' competencies. So our conceptual model is built considering the previously presented models and the literature review results. This slide shows our final model of the university market adjustment of accounting professionals' competencies. At the bottom, we find the supply side, university, and at the top is the demand side, the market. The horizontal dashed line separates the two sides, and the model starts with the construct of university perceptions of market expectations. An arrow with a solid line links those constructs that impact others. For example, university perceptions of market expectations affect how competencies are specified in accounting course curricula. Likewise, these specifications will impact the delivery of competencies and so on. The literature review confirms the existence of several gaps between these constructs. The gaps were identified and classified according to the two opposing constructs, as in the service quality model. This way we found 7 different gaps, 3 on the supply side, 3 between the supply and demand sides, and 1 on the demand side. Our framework represents gaps with a two-way arrow with a dashed line. All gaps will be discussed individually in the following slides. We will probably not have enough time to deeply explain each gap represented in the conceptual model, but at least we will deepen this first one. And to give a better visualization, the first gap, gap A, is highlighted in orange. Gap A represents the existence of discrepancies between universities' perceptions and market expectations regarding accounting graduates' competencies. This discrepancy is a problem since the university starts from this construct or conviction to build all the way to the competencies delivery. If there is a misalignment between the outset or from the outset, the point of arrival will hardly be the desired one. According to the literature review, the cause of this gap is a failure of the market to convey their needs to a university. This may be due to 1. Different views on who should take responsibility for the skills development of graduates, 2. Various understandings of the skills approach, or 3. Distinct skills expectations. So how could this misalignment be corrected? One of the solutions may be a reinforcement of university-industry cooperation. Another suggestion might be to use the influence of professional bodies on both sides, supply and demand, to align their perceptions. The next gap, gap B, represents the difficulty felt by universities in defining the content, methods and formats of their courses, so that their students develop the desired competencies. Several causes have been listed, including university priority constraints, external and internal influences, and considering these causes, its correction may involve adjusting universities' priorities or professional bodies assuming responsibility for training specific competencies. The existence of discrepancies between the competency specification and the competencies that students demonstrate at the end of their courses is what identifies Gap C. The causes may be linked to the university, the educators, or the students. Educators may have difficulty passing on knowledge or skills, and students may struggle to develop them. On the other hand, time constraints, class sizes, or funding may also induce this gap. Correcting all the previous will reduce or eventually eliminate this gap. Gap D represents the existence of discrepancies between the university's perception of graduates' competencies and the market perception of these graduates' competencies. This gap is a difference in perceptions, which cannot be eliminated objectively, and has no correction suggestions. Finally, it is fundamental that graduates' perceived competencies meet or exceed graduates' expected competencies to validate a general adjustment between the demand and supply side. Gap E represents this adjustment. The causes of this gap are not direct, arising from one or more gaps from A to C. In this way, to eliminate this gap, it is enough to eliminate those gaps with problems. In addition to the 5 direct gaps, 2 clustered gaps were studied in several empirical articles. Gap BC is one of them, representing the existence of discrepancies between the university's perceptions of needed or expected competencies and the competencies students demonstrate at the end of their courses. As it is a grouped gap, its causes and corrections are the same as for gaps B and C. Finally, gap C, D, and E, second clustered gap, represents the non-conformity of the specification of competencies by university with market expectations. Strict compliance with accreditation guidelines may be one of the causes. Correcting this gap may involve reinforcement of university-industry cooperation and greater involvement of professional bodies. Arrived at this point, it is worth highlighting our study's findings, contributions, and limitations. Based on a critical review of the literature, we found 7 gaps, 5 direct and 2 clustered ones. In the same way, the conceptual model was built. As such, the 3 contributions of the study are the identification of the gaps in literature, the characterization of the identified gaps, and the conceptual model of the university market adjustment of accounting professionals' competencies. As limitations, we indicate the choice of reviewed articles and the author's subjective analysis. Despite these limitations, the study allowed us to conclude that this area of investigation still has much to offer. Future research should explore the conceptual framework presented and complement the findings already drawn from published studies. Above all, we suggest developing studies to better understand the reasons for the various gaps between supply and demand, because when the reasons for their existence are understood, eliminating them will become much more manageable. On this slide, all references indicated in this presentation are presented, and we want to thank you very much for your attention, and we will be at disposal for any questions you may have. Thank you.